Another incident in Minneapolis last night as officials say a federal officer shot a man in the leg, leading to both of them being hospitalized.
The Department of Homeland Security said the officer was conducting a targeted traffic stop of a man accused of being in the country illegally. DHS laid out the timeline of events on X, writing, "In an attempt to evade arrest, the subject fled the scene in his vehicle and crashed into a parked car. The subject then fled on foot. The law enforcement officer caught up to the subject on foot and attempted to apprehend him when the subject began to resist and violently assaulted the officer. While the subject and law enforcement were in a struggle on the ground, two subjects came out of a nearby apartment and also attacked the law enforcement officer with a snow shovel and a broom handle. As the officer was being ambushed and attacked by the two individuals, the original subject got loose and began striking the officer with a shovel or a broomstick. Fearing for his life and safety as he was being ambushed by three individuals, the officer fired a defensive shot to defend his life. The initial subject was hit in the leg."
Just this morning, President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act if the unrest in Minneapolis continues. This law, which would allow him to deploy military forces to the area, has not been invoked since the Los Angeles riots of 1992. He wrote on Truth Social, quote, "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in this once great state." Tensions remain high throughout the city in the wake of the shooting. The New York Times reports that there were at least 200 protesters gathered near the scene on Wednesday night. The city of Minneapolis confirmed the incident and said that the man who was shot in the leg has non-life-threatening injuries. The city's official X account says, quote, "We understand there is anger. We ask the public to remain calm. The city of Minneapolis again demands that ICE leave the city and state immediately. We stand by our immigrant and refugee communities. Know that you have our full support."
Meanwhile, new developments in last week's fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good. CBS posted the story on Wednesday morning on X, writing, "The ICE agent who fatally shot Renee Good on January 7th in Minneapolis, Jonathan Ross, did suffer internal bleeding to the torso following the incident, according to two U.S. officials briefed on his medical condition. It's unclear the extent of his bleeding, but officials at the time did say he was released from the hospital that same day of the shooting.
However, not everyone was convinced that the claims of Ross being injured were truthful, and some took issue with CBS for reporting on the story. The network has been in hot water with those on the left since Barry Weiss stepped in as its new editor-in-chief. Writer and reporter Laura Bassett writing, quote, "The government is now lying through CBS because lying straight from the podium wasn't working." Former Congressman Justin Amash says, quote, "After gaslighting everyone about the incident, seeing the bad polling, and discovering they'd failed, the administration's next genius move was to leak a nondescript injury 1 week after the fact, possibly as mild as a bruise, and then get all of online MAGA to post, 'See?'"
I like Justin Amash, but I don't know. I can't tell. You're right. It could be the case that this is an internal bleeding. This is overblown, and he was not particularly injured. It could be the case that it was more serious than that. And you can get very injured by being hit by a car, even at a relatively slow speed. So I don't know what. I don't know. I can't tell from the video footage whether it was reasonable for him to think the car was coming at him and that getting out of the way was not really an option, even if it was an option. I don't know. And people just weighing in, oh yeah, he should have just taken the brunt of a car to the chest. That can really hurt you.
Well, I think naturally people...
You can get knocked over, hit your head, and,
Yeah, I think naturally people are going to question what's coming from DHS and from the president, and particularly if anybody else would have reported, I think because CBS has been under this microscope in the last 2 weeks just because of how it's changed and what the bigger company that owns CBS has at stake if they cozy up to the administration. People are critical of the news network. But I think if the officer got hurt, obviously that's not a great thing, and we want to make sure that he's okay. But there's no incident or part of this conversation where I said ever, or people on the left or right should be saying that they want to see either of the people hurt.
Yeah, I think the goal was... I'm just saying it to people who automatically just...
No, but I think the goal was for nobody to get hurt, right? The goal was for nobody to get hurt. So if we look at Minneapolis right now, to me, when I'm watching this video and these pictures, I'm like, this looks like a war zone. Like, what's happening? Like, even watching some of these images, I'm like, these people 2 weeks ago had a neighborhood where, probably everyday average neighborhood going on. And now they have even more, hundreds more ICE officers in their town. And this is just not effective policy. If we look at the fact that the president said he wanted to tackle immigration, many people on his team even more aggressive than he does, but the strategies and the way that people have reacted to it, from going into factories or pulling people out of their car, or even pulling people,
they're not going to do it at all.
But even pulling people out of their cars when they're dropping their children off. It's like there's a better way to handle immigration. And it's not only me saying that.
But the better way is for the cops to coordinate with federal immigration policy in blue cities and blue states, and they refuse to do that.
Well, you know how the president sat down with Mamdani and had an amicable conversation? Mamdani was the one that suggested and asked for the meeting. President Trump thankfully said yes, and they have what seems to be an amicable relationship. Maybe President Trump can be the one to step up to the plate with some of these mayors and governors and say, I'm going to come sit down with you and try to work out these differences, not on Truth Social. What we've seen a lot of is a lot of... We've seen a lot of arguing on social media. I'm saying somebody has to be the adult in the room.
He is subservient to the migrant community who he relies on for political support, which is why both him and Tim Walz didn't want to go, so when they discovered the fraud, wanted to cover it up because they didn't want to be scrutinizing this community because it was going to harm them politically. So they have no interest in doing any kind of law enforcement action for fraud or immigration. They've already demonstrated that. So that's why ICE is being brought in. Now, you don't have to like the way it looks, but that's the reality of what's caused the situation. I'm hearing not a lot of people defending, right? I hope the ambush attack, brutal beating of this officer,
crazy.
He was absolutely justified from that account, from firing a shot at that person.
And he shot, I noticed that he shot the person in the leg, which is not, I read through the police policy after you talked about it. It's not recommended, but at least we don't have another dead person that we're talking about now. Even though they were attacking them, that would be probably more justified and we wouldn't have to hash through it as much.
Certainly.
But still, we have somebody that's injured and can get arrested if they need to be arrested because now they're a criminal.
Well, right. I don't want people just dead for the sake of dead. It's, yes.
Right. You don't want
to
excessive force. He still was also being attacked, so maybe there was an excessive force there. But as we learn of more of these stories, nobody wants this to be the outcome where more people are getting shot in the leg, head, anywhere. But at the very least, we don't want
fled from the police, and the police officer followed him, did not fire on him, folled him.
Right, which is part of the protocol that I had read out the other day. Important.
Encountered him and was attacked, and that kind of behavior. And then who are these people
that jumped in?
Out? Are these bystanders who wanted to interfere with a law enforcement operation? What were they doing? Like, seems
like it needs to be looked into, but I think no matter. So a lot of the conversation that we're having.
If you see law enforcement trying to detain someone, that you should hamper law enforcement. That is a bad way of thinking in your life. That is dangerous for you. It's dangerous for law enforcement. It's wrong. It's legally wrong. It's morally wrong. It's wrong. Don't do it.
Well, when something goes wrong and we're looking back and we're saying, who can we point the finger? Who started this? That gets us nowhere. And so I think the conversation is like,
ran away.
Okay, we could say, okay, well, President Trump started this because he has this aggressive immigration policy. Well, Mayor Fry and Governor Walz started this because they didn't cooperate. Like, who cares about that? We need to have adults having conversations, people that got elected in office by Americans that don't want to see these outcomes. And so somebody has to be an adult is what I'm saying basically flat out. I don't care which side it is, but they need to have a dialogue about how to achieve the reform that people were actually looking for in this country and how to not get people shot and killed and officers hurt in the meantime.
And I think that there's illegally and then committed crimes, violent crimes or financial crimes or.
But wouldn't you prefer an officer not be hit with
started it?
Wouldn't you prefer an officer not be hit with a broom or a bat or whatever? Like,
of course.
Exactly. So let's figure out a better way to get people that are criminals.
But not by not having law enforcement. We need to have law enforcement.
For sure. That's why they need to have a conversation to start to figure out how they're going to implement.
Laws should be enforced.
I don't think ICE just all over the place is the way forward.
All right.
The Senate voted down a war powers resolution yesterday, ending the bipartisan push to limit Trump's actions in Venezuela. Don't go anywhere.